Hamdok has resigned just 6 weeks after he was reinstated in a controversial deal with the military. In a televised address after Sudanese security forces shot and killed 2 people during demonstrations in the old city of Omdurman, Hamdok said a new process was needed for the country to transition to democratic civilian rule. He says he has done his best to bring about peace and spare the country from falling off the cliff. All right, let's look at the Sudanese situation. Joining me now is academic Professor Ibbo Mandaza. Professor, I understand that you had indeed met Hamdok. So tell us what you know about this man, and what about these claims now that he did this for the sake of the country, for the sake of peace?
Yes, I know Abdalla Hamdok very well. Abdalla Hamdok worked at SABC Trust, the institute which we established in 1987, based in Harare, a regional think tank. He worked with us from 1998 to 2000 in the statistician role. We did the SADC Human Development Report of 1998, which was looking at the regional integration and democracy. He subsequently left us and went to join the ECA, where he was a director at ECA. And he left to join the Sudanese transitional government in 2019. The transitional government was set up, as you know, following the abdication of al-Bashir, which is an outcome of enormous civil action, demonstrations, protests against the military rule in the Sudan. In retrospect, it appears that the military used the transitional government to buy time, sacrificed Bashir in the process. And what was set up was a transitional government which was meant to steer the country towards democratic rule. And regrettably, in retrospect, I want to say that basically we shared notes with the Hamdok and others, because in Zimbabwe, we, as you know, we have also been pushing the idea of transitional authority, and based mainly on the return to constitutionalism, rule of law, and the return of the military to the barracks. Likewise, in the Sudan, in 2019, August 2019, the idea was precisely the same. Regrettably, you had a transitional authority in which you had a minority of the military vis-a-vis the civilian component of it, and a prime minister in the form of Abdalla Hamdok, who was supposed to steer the country towards democratic rule in 2023. And as you know, in October last year, 3 months ago, there was a coup led by the military, which was ipso facto meant to reverse the progress, the process towards a civilian rule, democratic government. And Hamdok and several other persons were arrested, put under house arrest. And in November, as a result of enormous pressure, both domestic and external, the military relented and pretended to, I say pretend in retrospect, because what they sought to achieve was to buy time, and they reappointed or reinstated Abdalla Hamdok as prime minister. But under very...
When you say the military wants to buy time, do you mean these attempts to transition to a democracy were all a sham, that the military has been in power and will be and wants to remain so?
Precisely. But the measure of the civic society, it's a precedent in Africa that you can have such outpourings, such groundbreaking activities on the part of civic society as we've seen in Sudan. I think it's a salutary lesson as to what the mass of the people can do.
Yeah.
So they put the military against the wall, so to speak, and they thought they'd buy time by reinstating Hamdok, who had been under house arrest. He had no time to consult his colleagues in the civic society, and he tried as best as he could to try and sell this agreement. But as things have turned out over the last month, throwing out, and Hamdok, being an honorable and principled man that he is, has decided to resign, which he has done today. And I think it's good for him personally, and notwithstanding the enormous investment that both domestic and external forces had placed in him in terms of the figurehead, the symbol of the fight for democracy. Hamdok has resigned.
Professor, the protesters don't like the deal that reinstated Hamdok. Maybe they don't like Hamdok himself as a figure sort of around democracy in Sudan. Why?
Well, I think basically Hamdok was placed in a very invidious position, caught between a military rule who was trying to buy time and with a kind of half-baked settlement, less than complete commitment to the transitional arrangement put in place in 2019. On the one hand, on the other, a civic action and protests which were demanding nothing less than a full commitment to democratic and civilian rule. He was caught in between, and he tried to straddle the two over the last month. He has failed, and he has bailed out. And now the Sudan is in a crisis, enormous crisis.
And we're seeing a crackdown, we're seeing people killed, and what does this mean for the hopes of Sudan returning to democratic rule? Are those hopes fading?
They are fading for the meantime. It's eyeball to eyeball between the military and the protesters. And you remember, the abdication of Bashir was at the back of enormous protests. The abdication or the part abdication of the military in November was on the back of enormous protests. So it's eyeball to eyeball. We'll see what happens in the next few weeks, next few months. But in the meantime, we have a serious crisis in the Sudan.
As a final question, we're seeing not a few military takeovers again on the African continent. So would the military in Sudan look at other places and be emboldened by that trend?
Hardly. I think the lesson learned, not only from the Sudan, but also even from Zimbabwe, is that military rule is untenable, unsustainable. Secondly, that the AU in particular should learn to understand that the coups do not help. Coups beget coups. And therefore there's a need to be firmly against systems or regimes which throw overboard constitutional rule. We must insist, as we should as Africans, as we've done elsewhere, has been done elsewhere in the world, that the constitutionalism, rule of law, and the military firmly in the barracks is the way to go. And I think that the Sudanese situation does inform us and educate us on the need to insist forever that constitutional rule, the rule of law, and the military in the barracks is the fundamental basis of democratic rule.
All right, thank you for your time tonight. Zimbabwean academic, author and publisher Professor Ibbo Mandaza looking at us, explaining the situation in Sudan.